Welcome everyone, my name is Varant, and today let's talk about PoE2's currency problem. Right here, I have some numbers from mid-league, or I'd say the start of mid-league, about 2 weeks in to 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4. And as you can see, there's been a decent bit of hyperinflation going on. Generally, this will be fine, and I wouldn't say that this is a problem on its own for most games. It's good to have some degree of inflation, since it means that more casual players get a better experience as the league goes on. It means that they can buy and upgrade gear they might not have been able to before, since currency gets less and less valuable as the league goes on. But at the same time, it's a bit problematic for specifically PoE2 because the market, well, it isn't run in diamonds or platinum. It's instead run in these exact same currency items that are being inflated. And again, this wouldn't be that huge of a deal on its own if it wasn't for how severely it's affecting early game players. Let me pull up the market right now and show you guys what I mean. So right here, I'm just filtering this to exalted or divine orbs and then by date. So we can see that there are some items that are a bit cheaper, but most items on here are at least 20 exalts with, I'd say, around half being in divine. I mean, look at that. A lot of items for divine orbs on here. And even the items that aren't for divine orbs, like for exalted, are 100 exalts, 15 exalts, 14 exalts, 10 exalts, an amount of exalts that you will not be getting just by doing the campaign. At least most likely you won't be. Which, it's unfortunate, but this pretty much locks you out of interacting with the market unless you drop a divine for the entire course of the campaign. It's very unlikely you'll be buying many items besides the tablet you won't need for the entire duration of the campaign, which is why the majority of players play Trade League. If you're playing Trade, it means you want to interact with other players. You want to feel that gritty MMO element that games like D4 are lacking, right? But it's really problematic when you can't interact with that until you get to the point of an endgame that isn't even fun right now. The majority of casual players are spending most of their time in the campaign because it's simply a better experience as is, but they can't interact with this element at all for the entire duration of it because they're simply being priced out of the entire market. You can't buy any decent piece of gear from the market at a price point that doesn't require you to get a divine and trade down from it. So, you might be asking, oh, hey, Varen, who really cares about that? That's not that bad. I'll just drop a rare and sell it for 20x like I did back in Dawn of the Hunt or back at launch of the game. And that used to be a viable solution, but in 0.3, which was my favorite league yet, there were a lot of crafting items added. You could get guaranteed god rolls for a lot of things, 1 in 8 plus chance for what was previously mirror tier bows, and easy breach ring crafting, the like. And that was great. That felt awesome. But at the same time, it pretty much turned any ground loot you get into absolute trash. Unless it's some god tier base, you're not getting any good gear off the ground anymore. And this has pretty much destroyed any kind of chance at getting divine tier items without dropping divines or without dropping one of those ridiculous crafting items and just making it a lot more RNG dependent. It's very hard to build up currency anymore unless you get one of those really high tier items. So let me show you what I mean. Even with bases, if I pull up boots here and we look at eye level 81 boots that are normal, so they're craftable, and also are exceptional tier, you can see that they're 1 exalt for eye level 81. 1 exalt. That's pretty much free. So you'd think if we just raise it by 1 level, what's it going to be? 2 exalts, 3 exalts? No, it's a whole divine. It's 4 nulls. And this is pretty much a common theme across all other pieces of gear. Because the real problem with this league is that the majority of players who have currency are the very, very, very high top number of players on there that can afford to buy all of this gear, and the only gear they need is the absolute highest eye levels. So again, it entirely locks you out of buying anything from the market as long as you're not in the absolute pinnacle of endgame. You're not fighting pinnacle bosses. You're not running tier 16 maps for this kind of stuff, tier 17 maps. You can't do it. And this brings me to my final point here. This is what I would say is the drop distribution for each set of leagues so far. I would say that in 0.1 and 0.2, it was relatively balanced with maybe around 20% of drop value coming from locks, mirrors, very, very, very high tier items, about 50% of value coming from the tinks, and about 30% coming from those lower to mid tier currencies like Exalts, like Alks, like Regals. And this was a good system because it meant that in early game, you could still buy some items with the few Exalts you get. I remember buying a bow for 3x at zero point 0.1 that I was super happy with. And I was like, wow, this feels like a great upgrade. I'm so happy I'm playing trade. And that was awesome. I felt like that gave you a decent amount of distribution and a decent amount of currency that you could trade with in the early game. It gave you a meaningful nature to tinks in the mid game and late game. And of course, if you got a crazy drop, it would entirely change your profile. Then in zero point 0.3 and zero point 0.4, we had a bit of a creep down here, and it wasn't really taken from those mid-tier currencies, but instead mostly from these lower tier currencies here, mostly from Exalts, mostly from Alex, mostly from Regals, have been significantly devalued in these last couple leagues, which has been okay for endgame. It doesn't affect people that much, but for early game especially, has pretty much destroyed what's happening. It rose or raised the bar a lot. And my biggest fear here is that this is going to continue into 0.5 plus, especially which is if it's an endgame patch, which we desperately need, will make things even worse. Because if people are playing for longer and longer, it's just going to cause more inflation as the league goes on. And it's going to start being taken away from these mid-tier currencies here too. And I really don't want to have to deal with an endgame where there are 3 or 4 currency items that take 100 hours of grinding each to get, and only those are worth anything on the market. And if you don't get one of those, who cares? You can't trade down to get the exalts you need to buy items. It doesn't matter. You can't get any divines, because if everything's 500 divines in the market in a few leagues from now, it won't matter that you can drop plenty of divines if you can't, like, I mean, people will say the exact same thing they're saying now, where they'll say, oh, well, items are cheaper than they ever have been. Just get a more valuable currency and trade it down. But it gets to a point where that's just impossible to do. And this is a problem I have faith in GGG for. I believe that they'll find some kind of solution to this. I just really think we need to bring light to this right now, because if this isn't something that's fixed by 0.5, by the endgame patch, whenever that comes, it's going to ruin the game, I think. I at least for casual play, there will not be any casual players after 0.5 if this doesn't get fixed. So yeah, that's about it. My name is Varen. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, comment what you thought below, and stay hydrated. That's about it, folks.